This is a very auspicious day on the Makara Masa according to the solar calendar. We call the Uttarayana, started about 2 weeks ago with the Shankranti. And it's very auspicious that we are joining here for a good satsangam. Let me start with a prayer. Harigi Om Shuklam Bharadaram Vishtum Shashivarnam Sadirbhujam Prasannavadaram Dhyayet Sarvavignopashantem Yashvadrida Bhagdradya Parishadya Parasadam Vignam Dignati Satatam Vishwakshenam Tamashriye Jnananandamayam Devam Nirmalaspatikakritim Adharam Sarvavidyanam Hayagrim Upasmakem Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Devo Maheshwaraha Guru Sakshat Param Brahma Tasmai Sri Gurave Namah Sruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavat Padam Shankaram Lokashankaram Kavitarki Simhaya Kalyan Gunashaline Srimate Venkateshaya Vedanta Gurave Namaha. So this time we are starting a series on Narada Bhakti Sutras. So I thought I have to explain at first who is Narada, what is Bhakti and what is Sutras. At least we will try to define the terms. And then there's about 84 sutras totally, which we will try to cover as much as we can in our 5-week session ending on March 7th. But today I will spend about the first 20-30 minutes just giving a brief introduction to Narada. Narada is no stranger to all Hindus. We would have seen him in our Puranas, we would have seen him in a lot of movies. So Narada is no stranger, he is well known all over the world. But at least for some people, just to give a brief background about Narada. And then what is this term Bhakti, and then what is the term Sutras. So I will first focus my first 20-30 minutes on those three topics, and then we will slowly get into the individual sutras by themselves. As you can see in the screen, you can see already some of the sutras are listed, which will be starting pretty soon. So with that, I want to first tell about Narada. Narada is, we know, all of us know, is a great devotee of Vishnu, and we call him as Triloka Sanchari. Triloka Sanchari means one who is capable of moving in the heavens, in the earth, and even in the hells below the earth. In Hinduism we believe there is the Bhuloka, which is the earth which we are living, and there are 7 lokas above us, the Bhuvar, Suvar, Maha, Jana, Taba and Satya lokas. And then we believe the Rasatala, Talatala, Patala, Vitala, Talavitala, Sutala, all those lokas which are below the earth. So, it is Narada have to have free hand, and he has got the blessings of the gods so that he can traverse anywhere. And so he is considered a friend of all of them. He is considered friend of the Devas. The Devas live above the earth, the humans live on the earth, and the Asuras live below the earth. That's what we believe in the Hinduism. So Narada is supposed to be friend of all. He is friend of Devas, he is friend of the Manushyas, and he is also friend of the Asuras. And you can see that he also goes and counsels Asuras, and sometimes he will, even stimulate the Asuras to go and fight with Lord Vishnu. We know all those stories. So he is a Triloka Sanchari, and he is a friend of everybody. So all the Asuras also, when Narada comes, they will respectfully call him to their house, and they will have a chat with him, and then they will send him. It is very rare that Asura, fights with Narada and things like that. You never probably heard about it. So with that, Narada himself tells a story in Bhagavatam. People know the famous scripture Bhagavatam, the 12th Skandam, 18,000 slokas, Bharatam, which was authored by Vedavyasa Maharishi, also called Badarayana Maharishi. And in the first canto, or the first Skandam of Bhagavatam, in the 5th and 6th chapters, Narada himself tells his own story. So whatever I am telling now is actually directly taken from Bhagavatam, and this is Narada's own words when he tells his story to Vedavyasa. It is said that Vedavyasa, he has authored all the other Puranas, he has authored the Mahabharata, he has authored the Brahma Sutras, he has already classified the Vedas, and he was in his ashrama in Badrikashrama. And when Narada went, Vedavyasa was telling Narada that I have done so much of works, but I still don't get a peace of mind. I don't get a sense of completion. Something is lacking in me. Something is telling me that I'm not full, I'm not complete. So I can't understand this. Can you please explain why I'm going through this mental turmoil, even after I've done so much for the society and for the God. And then Narada says at this time, you have forgotten to elaborate on the scheme of bhakti. You have talked about everything, but you have not done anything exclusively to highlight the importance of bhakti. So you need to do a work which will highlight the importance of bhakti Vishnu Bhakti and Deva Bhakti, those things. And once you do that, you yourself will feel you are complete. So that's how the conversation starts, and that's how, that gives the Veda Vyasa the motivation to write Bhagavatam. So Bhagavatam itself came out after the discussion between Narada and Veda Vyasa, and Narada tells Veda Vyasa, write a book which is full of bhakti, which will be, giving peace of mind to all the people on earth. And he actually even gives you an idea of what to write in the Bhagavatam. So there Narada tells a story, and he tells that in the previous janma, so Narada tells, because he can remember all his own previous janmas, like Krishna tells Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna, you don't remember your janmas, but I can remember all my janmas. That's a very famous sloka in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So same way, Narada says, I will tell you about my past birth and how I became what I am right now. And he tells that in the previous janma, he was like a 5-year-old boy, which he could remember, and his mother was a servant maid. So his mother was like a poor servant maid. She works in the other houses, helping them out. And at that time, we call Chaturmasya. Chaturmasya is the time, approximately it comes between July to October, the 4 months, or the 4 pakshas according to some people, and 4 months according to some people. Chaturmasya is the time when all the sannyasis, all our gurus, they don't move out. Usually other times they're always moving out, educating the people and enlightening the people. But in Chaturmasya, the rishis are supposed to stay in one place. They're not supposed to move around. So they just stay for those 4 pakshas or 4 masas in one place, and they do all their rituals and their sadhanas, and they also educate people in that place only. So in Chaturmasya, one time, lot of rishis had come to the place where Narada and his mother had lived. And Narada's mother is a servant maid and Narada is a servant boy. So he's actually helping out all the rishis. So he's a 5-year-old boy, but he's very polite, very humble. He's very respectful to these rishis. He knows how great these people are in knowledge and tapas. So he serves them with utmost devotion. So he serves all these rishis. So the rishis itself, over the days, they get an attraction for Narada. Oh, this boy is very young, but he's very humble and polite, and he's always willing to work and serving us. So at first they tell him, after the rishis eat, whatever the leftover food, they will give it to Narada. Please eat, we don't, and because usually the servants usually have to cook separately. But now the rishis are so affectionate to Narada, they said, after we eat first, whatever the leftover food you can eat. And that is considered a big blessing, because in Krishna himself tells in Mahabharata, Shuttam Bhagavado Shyanam, Shuttam Bhagiradi Jalam, Shuttam Vishnupada Dhyanam, Shuttam Ekadashi Vradam. And there's a discussion between Krishna and Duryodhana. When Krishna comes to talk peace, Duryodhana says, I am the most cleanest person, my palace is the most clean, you are not even coming to stay with me, you are staying with Vidura and other places. At that time Krishna says, Suddham means purity or cleanliness. There is only 4 things pure, Duryodhana. One is Suttam Bhagavado Shyanam, which means whatever the Bhagavadas have ate and the remnant of that food is considered very pure. Suddham Bhagavado Shyanam. Shuttam Bhagiradi Jalam, which is Ganges, the Ganga river. If you go and take a bath in the Ganges, you are supposed to not only clean your bodily dirt, you also clean all your sins. So that's why it's called Malapaharini, which not only removes your outside dirt, it also removes the dirt inside your body. That is the power of our sacred rivers, Ganges, Tungabhadra, Kaveri and all those rivers. They just don't clean our outside dirt. So Suddham Bhagiradi Jalam. Shuttam Vishnupada Dhyanam, meditating on the feet of Vishnu, Suttam Vishnupada Dhyanam. And Shuttam Ekadashi Vratam, one hour who follows the Ekadashi Vrata regularly. These only are considered pure, these 4 are considered pure Duryodhana, everything else is not considered pure. So that's how Krishna explains to Duryodhana. So this eating of the remnant of the Rishi's food is considered a big blessing, because that itself gives you knowledge, it seems, according to our scriptures. So then the Rishis are again satisfied with him, and by the time the Chaturmasya ends, they actually call Narada and tell, you have served so much for us, so we are going to teach you some esoteric secrets and mantras. So they actually educate him on all mantras and all the tattvas before they leave. So Narada, even as a young boy, is now very detached. He's developed all this devotion to God by hearing the Rishis constantly. And he's always thinking of God. At that time, his mother one day gets bitten by a snake and she dies. So Narada's mother dies when even Narada is very young, like he's still a 5.5-year-old kid. So Narada is now as nobody in the world. He's like pretty much an orphan. So, but at that time Narada's mind already is very detached with the material things. and his mind is already filled with devotion, because all these 4 months he spent with the rishis, serving them, eating their food, learning from them, and learning all the mantras and tattvas. He is already very detached and very, very devotional to the God by this time. So Narada says, I'm going to go to the forest and I'm going to just meditate on the Lord exactly how the rishis have taught me. I'm not interested in anything else. So this kid goes to the forest and he starts meditating. And he says after a few months, actually Lord Vishnu appears to him, not personally, but appears in his inner mind with clarity. And then Lord Vishnu is there for some time and then he disappears. So Narada says, oh, you didn't appear in front of me, but you appeared in my mind, but now even you have disappeared from your mind, I'm very agitated. At that time, it seems a voice is heard. It says, you will not see me anymore in this janma, but the next janma, you will always be with me and singing about me. You have some more prarabdha to be completed, so you will not see me anymore, but don't be upset and don't stop your sadhanas. Please do what you are doing, and next janma you will associate with me more strongly. So that's how the story. This is again all Narada's own words in Bhagavatam. You can go and check the 5th and 6th cantos, 5th and 6th chapters of the first canto or the first cantam of Bhagavata Puranam. And then it says that Narada as a young kid also, he practiced sadhanas. After a few years he dies. And in the next, what happens is at that time when he dies, his soul goes into Brahmaji's. The Brahmaji's soul, it merges with Brahmaji, and Brahmaji himself merges with Lord Vishnu at the end of the Kalpa. And when Lord Brahma is again creating, this time Narada comes directly from Brahma's mind itself. So Narada is not born to a human in the next Janma. He is directly, we call him as Manasa Putra, which means he is not born through a male and female. He is born directly from the mind of Brahma. We call Manasa Putras, means there are about like all the Sanakadi Rishis and Prajapatis. These are all about a few people, Manu, including Manu, the king Manu, all of them are called Manasa Putras of Brahma. They were directly born from the mind of Brahma itself. So Narada was another Manasa Putra of Brahma in the next Kalpa. And at that time, he is directly associated with Brahma and all the rishis. His knowledge grows leaps and bounds, and and he's already detached from the beginning. He doesn't want to marry or spend his life as a householder. He wants to just spend his time, singing about God and praising the Lord and spreading the message of devotion to all over the 3 worlds. At that time, the Lord himself gives him his veena. Everybody sees the veena in Narada's hand. It's called Mahati. That is the name of the veena in Narada's hand that was given by the Lord itself. So that's where the first singing starts. All of us have this. Today we have musical instruments and singing. Narada is one of the founders of this sampradaya of singing about the God. He is the one first given an instrument. And we all know Saraswati all had his instrument, but we have not heard Saraswati going and singing everywhere. But Narada is the one who actually goes and takes his veena and sings everywhere about Lord Vishnu and other gods also. Narada has no sectarian things, though he is a devotion of Lord Vishnu. He is devoted to Lord Shiva, Parvati, everybody. And you can see that he has, he sings about them also when he goes to their places. So that is kind of how Narada's story is, and the life stream. And then what are the important people? There is a lot of our Puranas. Almost every Purana there will be a story about Narada. But I think the 4 important things which we need to know is about Prahlada, Dhruva, Vedavyasa and Valmiki Maharishi. At least those 4 are the key things. There are several stories about Narada, but those are 4 important people, and all of us know about Prahlada, the son of Hiranyakashipu, the demon. And we know that it is said that when Kayathu, the wife of Hiranyakashipu, was pregnant, Hiranyakashipu was doing his penance, trying to get more powers. Narada takes Kayathu, Hiranyakashipu's wife, to his own ashrama and starts, telling everyday stories. And his intention is not telling stories to Kayathu. He is telling stories directly to the Prahlada, who is still as a fetus or inside the uterus of Kayathu. So basically, Prahlada gets all his instructions directly from Narada Maharishi when he is in the utero itself, when he is still in the pregnancy stage. So that is why even today we say that if you want your kids to be very knowledgeable, and you need to the pregnant woman needs to listen a lot of stories about God and scriptures during their pregnancy, so the kid will be born with the knowledge, and Prahlada is a prime example. So Narada actually gives a lot of education to the Prahlada inside the embryo itself. And so that's when Prahlada is born with a great devotion, and we know the story of Prahlada and Narsimha Avatara, everything. So, but again, the stimulus for Prahlada to become a great devotee was hearing all these, the Upanyasas and the Kirtanas of Narada Maharishi. So that is one important association between Narada and Prahlada. The second one is Dhruvan. Dhruvan is another, we know Dhruva is another famous child who became a great king, and he also became the pole star, the Dhruva Nakshatra. And again, we know the story of Dhruva, where he was insulted by his stepmom and he was driven out of he leaves the kingdom, and he wants to pray. And his own mother says, if you have to get any blessings, you have to pray to Vishnu. But this young kid is again in the forest. He doesn't even know how to chant the mantras. He just walks out of the house in the forest, and Narada Maharishi takes pity on this young kid, and he is the one who comes and teaches him about how to do japa, mantra japa. He teaches him the Dwadasakshara mantra, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. That's a very important, we call Dwadasakshara mantra, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So that is what Narada Maharishi teaches Dhruvan. And he also teaches how to exactly the process of meditation, all that the yoga Shastra is taught by Narada Maharishi to Dhruva. And the young kid Dhruva now has knowledge of how to meditate, how to chant the mantras correctly. And that's how he meditates. And then we know how Lord Vishnu appeared in front of Dhruva and gave him all the blessings, and Dhruva became a great emperor. And then after his time in earth, he became the pole star, and he's supposedly still living in the pole star till the end of this kalpa. So again, the Dhruva story, again the motivation for Dhruva comes from Narada Maharishi. So again, that's another story. And Vedavyasa, we just started with it. We thought about how Vedavyasa was so dejected even after writing so many scriptures, and how Narada consoles him and says, if you write a scripture about the bhakti, Vishnu bhakti, and all the important dharmas associated with bhakti, you will feel relieved. And that's how Vedavyasa writes the Bhagavatam. And after writing Bhagavatam, Vedavyasa feels he is complete, he has done what he needs to have been done. So the big motivation for even writing Bhagavatam comes only from Narada to Vedavyasa. So, and then finally Valmiki Maharishi. Valmiki Maharishi lived even before Vedavyasa times. Vedavyasa lived in Dwapara Yuga during Krishna's time, and Valmiki lived in Treta Yuga during Rama's time. And we know the story of Valmiki too. Valmiki was a forest robber, a dacoit we call him. He used to murder people, steal their properties, and that's how he made a living. And one day, Narada happened to come. He was even trying to steal Narada, and Narada educates him, what you're doing. Ask if your family will share in all your sins. You're doing so many sins by killing people. You're doing so many papas by killing people, stealing their money. Ask your family. You are doing all for your family. Go and ask your family whether they are willing to share all your papas. And that's how Valmiki, as a robbery, goes. His family says, no, we want your money, but we don't want your papas. That's when Valmiki gets the realization that, at that time he's not even called Valmiki, that he gets the realization that, he has to bear the brunt of this sin. So he goes back to Narada and tells, now help me. And that's when Narada teaches him the Rama mantra. And we know that Valmiki meditated on the Rama mantra for several years. And that's how he gets the full knowledge. And when he even gets the full knowledge, he is now called Valmiki Maharishi. And Narada is the one again who goes to him and stimulates him to write Ramayana. So it's actually, if you read the first chapter of the Balakanta of the Ramayana, it starts Tapasvadhyaya Daratam Tapasvi Vagvidamaram Naradam Paripapracha Valmiki Munipungavam. It even starts, Narada starts talking to Valmiki Maharishi, and Valmiki starts talking to Narada Maharishi. That's how even the Ramayana starts. If people who know the Ramayana, that is the first statement of the Ramayana. So Narada is the one who actually stimulates Valmiki Maharishi. He tells briefly, actually Narada actually gives the story of Rama in 100 slokas, which is called Satashloki Ramayana or Samkshepa Ramayana. It's in the Balakanta. The first 100 slokas, it's actually Narada's version of Ramayana to Valmiki, and then Valmiki expands those 100 slokas to 24,000 slokas, which is the rest of the Valmiki Ramayana. So even for writing Ramayana, Narada Maharishi is the great motivator. So this is the Prahlada story, Dhruva story, Vedavyasa story, Valmiki Maharishi story. So all these are all people who have been modeled and who have been stimulated by Narada to do all good things. And without Vedavyasa and Valmiki, we would have not gotten the Ramayana Mahabharatam now. Ramayana and Bhagavata Puranam. So that is about Narada. So he is very well versed in all knowledge. Even in Chandogya Upanishad, there is a chapter about Narada. So he's a lot of contributions. He is well versed in all the branches of knowledge. In Chandogya Upanishad, Narada himself lists what and all he knows. It's a big list. He tells, I know mathematics, I know this. He gives a long list of things to Sanat Kumara, what and all he knows. So Narada's education is, we would say, unlimited. The second thing is about bhakti. When we tell about bhakti, what does this bhakti mean? I think when we understand the term love, that is like a common term which we use. Love is kind of a mutual liking, or people like each other. That's it's a term where you have an attraction or a liking for a person. But even this love has different categories. And again, you can have love with selfish reasons, without selfless reasons. That's actually reason based. But then there is actually a categories of loves too. For example, the mother loves a child. The mother, we call is more as affection. That is the term we use. When a mother or a father like their small kid very much, or the grandfather loves the kid, we call that as an affection. But then when a male and a female like each other, that's a mutual liking. That's a colloquial term, love, which we use now, but it's a mutual liking or attraction. That is the term we use there, liking and attraction. And then we have people, you have friends. You have some dear friend, they've been friends for 50 years, 60 years. They are like know each other, they are very intimate with each other. And all of us have college friends and other things, and you still have friendship with them. So that's also a form of love. That is called friendship. And then there is a love which you have for people who are more higher than you, like your gurus, acharyas, and God himself. That is mixed with some respect and admiration. So that is what is another type of love. So devotion is also a type of love, affection is a type of love, liking and attraction is a type of love, and also the friendship. These are all different formats of love. So all these come under the category of love. And even psychologists define 8 categories of love and other things like that. People can read psychology about that. So but this love is a common term, but basically the love which you have for somebody who is superior to you. And that is not because you are bound to them, but it's because of more respect, admiration, and awe-inspiring about them, and that's why you have a love for them and you worship them, and that's what we call devotion. So devotion is also a form of love. So that's what I want to tell. And again, when you look at the causes of love, I told you the categories of love: affection, liking, friendship, devotion. These are all called categories of love. And then there is causes of love too. You can have love for, like I said, one of the reasons you have love is because of you have intense respect for the people. Other thing you have love is because they support you. Sometimes you like some people because they are supporting you all the time. They are giving you a job, they are giving you money. So that's actually a transactional love. You like them because they are supporting your livelihood, they are supporting their growth. And then even the biological attraction. That is what happens when the parents and the kids love each other, because the same mother, she is very affectionate to her own kid, but there is another kid in the next house which is the same age of the kid, but she is not very attracted to that kid, because this kid is her own. Same, even the mother, she is affectionate only to her own kid, but even the next door neighbor kid who is same age and she is not attracted to them. So this is again a biological attraction. Even the motherly love has a biological attraction to basis to that. And then again, friendship, you have some people whom you are close and you have intimacy, you can share your details. So that is because of the intimacy you get a love. So these are all different causes of love too. So even there is categories of love and causes of love. So you need to differentiate where you are, and that's when Narada begins to explain that devotion is basically one which is selfless. It is you should not have any cause for it. If you have a biological attraction or even an admiration, let's say even you are admiring one particular guru and you are very respectful to that guru because he is full of knowledge and good character, like next day you listen to the news that some scandal happened in the ashrama of that guru, you lose respect for that guru the next day itself. So even for gurus, some money scandal happened or some sex scandal happened in that guru's ashrama, you lose respect for the guru. You have been respecting him for 10 years. And within one day you will forget that guru because you heard some bad scandal about him. So even respect and admiration will sometimes go away. So you have to understand even the causes of the love. You will lose the respect in the particular thing which you admired goes away. So that's why Narada is defining bhakti as not only it's a continuous admiration, respect, and thing, but it is also selfless. It is not dependent on other factors. Because if you depend on other factors, when the factors go away, you will lose the love also. So that is something, so you have to know, that is kind of a broad definition of bhakti, but we will discuss more as we go along each sutras. And now, coming to the term sutras itself. So I defined Narada, we defined bhakti. Now I'll have to tell you what sutras are. Sutras are like short sentences, and there is a definition of sutras in our own scriptures. Alpaksharam, asandigdam, saravat vishwatomugam, astobam, anavadyam cha, shutram, shutra vido viduhu. That is a sloka defining a shutram. Alpaksharam, asandigdam, saravat vishwatomugam, astobam, anavadyam cha, shutram, shutra vido viduhu. This is how the knowers of Sutra Vido Viduhu means the knowers, the people who are knowledgeable, define the sutras like this. Alpaksharam means very few words. It is not like long sentences or long essays. It's like a few sentences, few words. And as you can see in our screen itself, very, very few words for each sutra. So this is very few words. It doesn't have like long laundry list of things. Asandigdam means unambiguous. It is not confusing. It gives you the point precisely. It is complete, though it is short. Saravat, it actually captures the essence of what it needs to convey. So it's complete, though it is small. Vishwatomugam, that is very, very important. Vishwatomugam means one who has faces on all sides. Actually, each sutra, though it is small, it actually has analyzed that particular topic in multiple angles. We call multiple viewpoints. So though it is a one-line sentence, it has actually analyzed that particular topic in multiple viewpoints and put it in a condensed way. Astobam, anavadyam. Astobam means it doesn't repeat things that much. And anavadyam means faultless. Nityaya, Niravadyaya, we call Lord Venkateshwara Nityaya, Niravadyaya. Niravadyaya means one who is faultless or blameless. Anavadyam and Niravadyam are the same, faultless or blameless. So basically, few words, unambiguous, complete, gives multiple perspectives, free of repetition, and it is faultless. So that is, if you fulfill all these criteria, it is called a sutra in our Hinduism. So to write a sutra, you should be a master of masters. Ordinary people can't write sutras. Only people, because you have to convey in short sentences deep and very multiple meanings. And that is why to write a sutra, you have to be a big Maharishi. Even few acharyas can write this. Only Maharishis can compose these sutras because they are direct knowledge from God. They are the ones who reveal the Vedas to us. So most of the time you will see the sutras are composed by Maharishis. You will very, very, very rarely see even acharyas compose. You have some acharyas in Tamil, other people who have composed sutras, but they are no way compared to what the rishis have given us. And like I said, there are several sutras. Is actually you can list almost 30, 40, 50 sutras in our Hindu religion. But the most important ones are, talking about who is God, how to reach God. That is called the Brahma Sutra. That is the most famous. Badarayana or Veda Vyasa is also called Badarayana Maharishi. He is composed the Brahma Sutra. That is the most famous of all sutras. There are many. I listed already 4 in our flyer. Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, Narada's Bhakti Sutra, Gautama Dharma Sutras, and Badarayana's Brahma Sutra. If you want to single out which is the most important sutra, it's Brahma Sutra of Badarayana, because that's how Adi Shankara wrote a commentary on Brahma Sutra, Ramanujacharya wrote a commentary on Badarayana's Brahma Sutra, Madhvacharya wrote a commentary on Brahma Sutra, and it is the one which has been commented by all the senior acharyas. So that because that itself says, when a lot of people are writing commentaries, then that is the most important one. So Badarayana's Brahma Sutra is the most important of all the sutras. But the other sutras, to Narada Bhakti Sutras, they teach you about bhakti, what is devotion, how to practice devotion. Patanjali's Yoga Sutra teaches you how to meditate and do so that you can feel the dissolution of the mind and merging with the Lord through Yoga Shastras. So that is Patanjali Rishi, and Gautama Dharma Sutras, the one actually explains all the rules of dharma, what we have to follow. There are other things to Manusmriti, Parasara Smriti, everything, but like Gautama Dharma Sutras are like the prototype based on which everybody elaborated. It tells you from all the rules and regulations which one has to follow from birth to death. So the Gautama Dharma Sutras are the most famous for that. There are other Dharma Sutras too, but like I said, these are the most famous. So that is kind of about the definition of the sutras, the different categories of the sutras and other things. So like I said, we have what we call the Shad Darshanas in Hinduism. which is the darshanas. See, the Vedas are so vast, and not everybody can read the entire Vedas, but then some people have condensed the Vedic meaning. So they are called darshanas. Darshanas mean they are based only on the Vedas, and they are trying to condense exactly what the Vedas are telling, and even there is interpretation difference. It is the same Veda, but people interpret it differently. That's how we get the Nyaya Shastra, Vaisheshika Shastra, Yoga Shastra, Shankhya Shastra, Mimamsa Shastra, and Vedanta Shastra. So even Vedanta Shastra is coming only from the Vedas. So each of these Saddarshanas, each of them has a sutra by themselves. There is a Nyaya Sutra, Vaisheshika Sutra, Shankhya Sutra, Yoga Sutra, Mimamsa Sutra, and Vedanta Sutra is also called Brahma Sutra. So these are all different types. So the Brahma Sutra is more knowledge based, the Yoga Sutra is more meditation based, the Dharma Sutra is more rules and regulation based on our daily living from birth to death, and the Bhakti Sutras are the ones which tell you actually about Bhakti. You say have devotion to God, because once you have devotion to God you can achieve anything. That we know from the stories of Prahlada, Dhruva, and even from Ambarisha, Vibhishana, Arjuna. They are all devotion to the Lord, and we know how much they accomplished during their lifetime. So, the people who are devoted to God have accomplished more than people. There are people who are considered faithless and who don't believe God. They have also accomplished, there is no doubt. But, this is the, this is the maximum, even the devotions by the Lord is, people who are devotees have accomplished more than people who have been non-devotees. So, we know from our stories all the rishis and the kings who have accomplished so much. So that is the importance of devotion. So now we will actually get into the Narada Brahma Bhakti Sutras by itself. So Narada Bhakti Sutras are 84. So there are two Bhakti Sutras for your information. One is called Narada Bhakti Sutra, the other one is called Shandilya Bhakti Sutra. So there are two. In Yoga Sutra you have only one Yoga Sutra, Patanjali Yoga Sutra only. So in Vedanta Sutra, you only one Vedanta Sutra by Badarayana or Vedavyasa. But in Bhakti Sutra, there are actually two Bhakti Sutras. One by Narada Maharishi and one by Shandilya Maharishi. Narada Maharishi's Bhakti Sutras are considered the senior one, and then the Shandilya Maharishi is the next one. Narada Bhakti Sutras has 84 sutras. As you can see in the slide what we already have listed 4. So there is 84 of like that in the Narada Bhakti Sutras. And Shandilya Bhakti Sutras has 100 exactly. So they say that you should read both the Narada Bhakti Sutra and the Shandilya Bhakti Sutra to get the whole picture. Though each of them by itself is complete, you will get a better perspective if you reach the 84 plus 100, the 184 sutras. You will get a very complete all-round view of Bhakti. And the way both of them analyze is a little bit different. But the Narada Bhakti Sutras are considered the senior sutras, and the Shandilya Bhakti Sutras are considered the junior sutras. But both of them are great Maharishis who gave us these sutras. So just to understand, there are two Bhakti Sutras, and probably in the future we'll try to do Shandilya too. Is another great Maharishi who has done a lot of contributions to our Hindu religion. And now coming to the actual organization of the Narada Bhakti Sutras itself. So basically there are 84 sutras I told you, and out of the 84 sutras it is given in 5 chapters. So actually Narada Maharishi has put this in 5 chapters, and we will not be going through chapters, we'll just go in the continuous sequence as we are. But the 84 sutras, this is how it is classified. Number 1 to 24, the first 24 sutras, they actually tell you about what is bhakti. They give a definition of bhakti, and actually it is called parabhakti. That is another important concept which Narada will be hammering here. There are 2 types of bhakti. We call aparabhakti and parabhakti. There are 2, so everybody is devoted, but there is 2 categories of devotion, aparabhakti and parabhakti. I will give you a very simple example. You have some problem in your job or some problem in your health. So you go to Venkateshwara temple, you participate in Sudarshana Homa, you go and do pradakshinas to Lord Venkateshwara, you do pujas and abhishekas, you sponsor abhishekas. This is also devotion. But this is called aparabhakti, because you are having devotion but there is some transaction involved here. Lord, I am having troubles in my life, can you please save me from these troubles? And I am not blaming you, I pray for that, you pray for it. Everybody prays, all of us are humans. So that is the one kind of devotion which Krishna also agrees. That's also a devotion only, because it is in 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Artha, Arthati, Gijnasu, Jnani. There are 4 types of people who worship me, Arjuna. Artha is the one who is suffering from some problem. Artharthi is one who is not suffering, is doing well, but he is already the CEO of a company, he is already chief executive officer of the company, but now he wants to become the governor of the state. Then from the governor of state, you want to become the president of the United States. So you are already doing well, but you want to climb more and more higher levels. That's called Artharthi. So they also pray to Lord, to me. And then there is Jignasu, means one who is interested in knowing about the philosophy, learning about things, trying to get knowledge. That's called Jignasu. And last is Jnani, who is already in knowledge. He has Tattva Jnana. He already knows what is God. He knows what is the universe. He is very clear. He has clear concept of all the philosophies, everything. But still he is worshipping the Lord. That is the highest state. Because Krishna says, I have 4 types of devotees, Arjuna. One who is praying to me because he is suffering. One who is praying to me because he wants more and more things. Person is praying to me because he wants more and more knowledge. And then one is praying to me who is already in knowledge, who already has accomplished things. And that Jnani is my most dear also. That's what he says. So all of these are devotees. I appreciate all of them. So Krishna doesn't differentiate. All of my devotees, I appreciate all. Even if you go to pray to Krishna asking for problem help, he likes it. So basically Krishna himself says, all these 4 are my devotees, but the Jnani is the best of them. So some people are already in knowledge and they have no reason, they express their devotion to the God. So that is the highest level of bhakti, that is called the Parabhakti. So I gave a simple example, but Narada will give you more examples as we go along. There's a Aparabhakti and a Parabhakti. So the first 24 sutras actually give you a definition of Parabhakti. Then from 25 to 33, Narada is trying to tell us why bhakti is superior. Because there is Karma Marga, where you are doing all rituals. The Jnana Marga, where you are trying to learn all the scriptures and trying to analyze the scriptures. Then you have the Yoga Marga, where you are doing meditation and tapas, doing pranayamas and controlling your mind. Chitta Vritti Nirodha, Chitta Vritti Nivritti, you are trying to accomplish those things. So these are all different ways of which you can reach God. Karma Marga, Jnana Marga, Yoga Marga, Bhakti Marga. So Bhakti is by devotion itself you can reach God. So Narada Maharishi is trying to explain in 25 to 33 why is Bhakti superior to others. If you go to Badarayana's Brahma Sutra, he will try to explain why Jnana is the highest, because they are propounding that particular way. So if you go to Badarayana's Brahma Sutra, he will very clearly say Shastra Yonitvat, which means unless you know the Shastras well, you cannot know God. It is a very, very famous statement of Badarayana Maharishi. So basically each of them will explain, but each of them are rishis and each of them is valid in their own viewpoint. So Narada Maharishi is trying to explain the greatness of Bhakti in 25 to 33 sutras. Then from 34 to 50, he explains the sadhana. So now you are telling me, okay, you are defined Bhakti, you are telling me why Bhakti is great, tell me what to do exactly, give me a manual, handbook. So the 34 to 50th sutras emphasize the exact sadhana of Bhakti. Narada explains what are the different ways you can practice Bhakti and how you can slowly evolve yourself. And then from 51 to 66, Narada is trying to explaining the science of devotion. Okay, you are doing devotion to God, you need to have some external signs. Like for example, I am a physician, you see somebody is sick in the hospital, we look at certain signs. We know when we see those signs, we know he is improving. When we see certain signs, we know he is deteriorating. So basically in the hospital to day in and day out, that's what we are doing. We are using certain criteria. Okay, you are meeting all these criteria or you are showing all these signs, okay, you are improving. You are not improving, we make the decision, So basically Narada is trying to explain the same way how people will get to know signs, like in terms of like what are the signs of a devotion getting mature in you. And then in 67 to 84, the last 17-18 sutras, Narada is trying to tell what are the glories of being a devotee. So first is to tell you the greatness of bhakta, greatness of doing bhakti. Then he is telling the greatness of being a bhakta. So one is telling the greatness of bhakti itself. The other one is what are the glories of a bhakta. So when you become a real bhakta or a devotee, you yourself become glorious in your own way. That's why we are talking about Narada Maharishi. He lived centuries ago and we believe that he is still living. We talk about Prahlada. Prahlada lived in Krita Yuga so long ago. And now we are talking about Prahlada even now because that is the greatness of devotion. That devotion gives you immortal fame. People will forget even the President of the United States, President of America, everything, but we have been remembering all these devotees even after several centuries. So that is one of it gives you immortal fame. That's one thing. But Narada explains all the glories of being a bhakta and what are the siddhis a bhakta can get. So those are things he's telling in the 67 to 84. So those is kind of the summary of the 1 to 84 chapter, sutras in the Narada Bhakti Sutra. So with that introduction, we will go directly into the sutras now, and we'll try to cover about 5 to 10 sutras during this session, because I wanted to give a broad introduction about this, and in the next sessions we'll rapidly go through a lot of the sutras as we go along in the next few weeks. So the first sutra, Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namah Atato Bhaktim Vyakyasyamah. So this sutra number 1. Atato Bhaktim Vyakyasyamah. So that is the sutra. It is Ataha Bhaktim Vyakyasyamah. That is how we split it. So it means thereafter we will try to explain or expound on bhakti. So that is the meaning of the simple meaning of that particular statement is thereafter we will try to explain bhakti. So there is a difference, because if it is Sandilya Sutras, it will start as Atato Bhaktim Gignyasaha. So that's a Gignasa and a Vyakyasa. So even Badrayana's Brahma Sutra will start Atato Brahma Gignasa, which means we will start with investigation. The word Gignasa is investigation, whereas Vyakyasama is explanation. So they are trying to investigate, and even at the end of investigation you are going to get an answer. But there is a different terminology. So Narada is telling, I am not investigating what bhakti is, I am going to explain what bhakti is. So that is the main difference between the beginning of Shandilya Bhakti Sutra, Narada Bhakti Sutra. It starts as Atato Bhaktim Vyakyasamaha, that starts Atato Bhaktim Gigyasaha. So Narada is telling, and the term Vyakyasamaha is very famous in our religion. Vyakyasamaha actually means I will try to give you multiple viewpoints on bhakti. Though the word Vyakyasa means just in simple terms explain, it is not just simple explanation. It is explaining a topic in multiple viewpoints. In multiple angles we call. So you are trying to explain the topic from multiple angles or multiple viewpoints. So Narada is starting the chapter with, I am going to now explain bhakti in multiple viewpoints to you. But the first question is asked is, Atato means now thereafter. So thereafter means what thereafter? So you have done something, because you say thereafter means you have done already something. So after that only I am going to explain to that. So it also starts as thereafter we will explain bhakti. So what is this thereafter means? Which means you have done something already and then only you are going to explain. So that is the very important thing. Even Badrayana's Brahma Sutra starts Atato Brahma Gignyasaka, which means thereafter we will start investigating into Brahman. So which means you need some preliminary qualifications. So that is the word. That's why when they start Atato means you need some preliminary qualifications. Thereafter means you have acquired those qualifications. It is like same thing. You want to do PhD, you have to do first your postgraduate degree. If you do a postgraduate degree, you become eligible to go for a PhD school. You cannot go, we have seen very few geniuses go from school to PhD, but the general rule is you have to go through college, finish your undergraduate, postgraduate, then only you can go to PhD. So to get a PhD, you should always already be a postgraduate. That is your basic qualification. So same way, all these shastras will start, you need to have some basic qualification. Once you acquire that basic qualification, you can come to read about this. So that is why, like I said, it's a one statement, but it has so many meanings to that. So now the question comes is, what is this thereafter mean? So what is the preliminary qualification? So there is two ways of looking into it. One is called educational qualification. The other one is called mental qualification. So most of these shastras, because again these shastras are very little bit higher level, and so you need to have some basic qualification, and in terms of education itself, like going to postgraduate degrees and educational qualification. Mental qualification means you should be having certain good mental qualities. You cannot be killing people every day and doing all bad things and then say I'm going to read this and read that. So basically mental qualification means you have to get some good qualities within yourself. So you have to have both. So you need some educational qualification and as well as some mental qualifications or qualities to make you eligible to start bhakti. The same thing to Badarayana explains, and same thing Patanjali Yoga Rishi, all they start, you need to have some basic qualification and then you start about it. So what is this basic qualification? So this is where we need the commentaries. So because for all the sutras, how do I interpret the meaning? So most of us are not that knowledgeable. That's why you have people who are Maharishi. So it's actually one of the Maharishis will write the sutras, and either another Maharishi or another Acharya who is knowledgeable will comment on it. That's only based on the commentaries we learn all these meanings. Because it's a very, very short sentence and it has so much deep meaning. So that is how the commentaries come. That's why Badarayana's Brahma Sutra was commented by Adi Shankara, Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya. So you have to read their commentaries, then only you will get a deeper meaning. So same way to read the sutras to everything, Yoga Sutra, every sutra has a lot of commentaries. It is usually written by the other commentaries, written by the other rishis or by great acharyas. Only they write commentaries. To write commentary also you should have very, very broad knowledge. So for the Narada Bhakti Sutras, there are several commentaries, but I am just going to tell the commentaries written in the last 100 years. Narada Bhakti Sutras has been there for so long, we don't even know how many people wrote commentaries, but there are some prominent people during our lifetime who written the commentaries. Shivananda Maharishi, Shivananda Acharya who lived in Rishikesh, and then a lot of the Ramakrishna Math Acharyas like Harshananda, Vivekananda himself, Swami Vivekananda himself has written a explanation for the Narada Bhakti Sutras, and Vivekananda's disciples, Tyagishananda, then Harshananda, they have written a lot of commentaries on Narada Bhakti Sutras, and even the C.C. Ravi Shankar Guru, who is currently living with our lifetime, he has written commentaries on Narada Bhakti Sutras. So we are going only by the commentaries, of these great souls to explain the meaning. So it is not, because these are all deep meaning, and we have to go with the people who are acharyas, who are knowledgeable in that and have written commentaries on that. So there is two ways. So one qualification is karma and jnana. So you have done all the rituals, you have learned all the scriptures, still you are not feeling satisfied and complete, then you come to bhakti. So that is one way of looking at educational qualifications. You know about Karma Shastra, you know about Brahma Shastra, you have tried all that and you are still not, you are feeling inadequate or unaccomplished. So that is what we call an educational qualification. Then there is some of the mental qualities. They say that you have to have Viveka, Vairagya, Shama, Dhamma, Shraddha and Mimamsa. This is similar to the qualities what even Adi Shankara lists for learning Vedanta Shastra. Like Viveka means you should know what is eternal and non-eternal, what is fleeting, what is permanent and temporary, what is the real truth and what is false. Those are all called Viveka. Vairagya means detachment. You should be you should not always be doing working on material things and sensual pleasures. You should slowly get some detachment. Shama Dhamma means control of the mind and control of the senses. Not running your senses, always enjoying sensual pleasures or always mentally thinking about other things. And then Mimamsa means the investigation. You should have an inquisitive mind. We call it inquisitive mind. So the Mimamsa itself means investigative. So you should have an investigating capacity. And then Shraddha is faith. You should have faith on our scriptures and the Guru and the God. So these are all what we call some qualities. Viveka, Vairagya, Shama, Dhamma, Shraddha, Mimamsa. Ramanujacharya has given an explanation for his qualities. Ramanujacharya in his Chandogupta in the Sri Bhashyas and Vedartha Sangraha by Ramanujacharya, he has given some basic qualifications who can read bhakti. And he has also given some of this like Viveka, Vimoha, Abhyasa, Kriya, Kalyana, Anudarshana, Anavasada. These are all different terms. If I try explaining all those terms, we cannot even complete one sutra. But just to understand that Ramanujacharya in his Sri Bhashya and his Vedanta Shankara has given what are the basic qualities for following the path of bhakti. So these are all some of the explanations I have given you. So you need to have, so you have read some shastras, you feel incomplete, or you have not read the shastras but you have developed some qualities. But Narada at one point will say, bhakti is so easy and so important that you don't need to have any qualification also. So though we say Atato Bhakti Vyakyasamayam, after that or thereafter we'll start discussing bhakti, it is generally agreed that you should have some basic qualifications, but bhakti is one which needs no qualifications also. anybody is eligible to do bhakti. Only for the other things, like our priest go to the Garbhagriha and do puja to Lord Venkateshwara. Not all of us can go and do puja to Venkateshwara Garbhagriha. You need to have certain qualities. You should have some rules. You should be wearing the right attire. You should be doing all the Sandhya Vandana and all the rituals. You should be, having purity of mind and thought. So not all of us who are going to different places, eating different things. We can walk to the temple, but we can't walk into the Garbhagriha or the Sanctum Sanctorum. Only the priest and other eligible people can get into Sanctum Sanctorum. So even we see the criteria even in our own temples. Why some people can go up to one point, some people can go up to other points. But same way to bhakti, you need to have some basic qualities. But bhakti is also one. Most of the people don't need qualities also. Even the simplest person can start practicing bhakti. So the practice becomes more important than the qualifications at one point. So the next thing will go. So the next sutra will start. Sa tvasmin parama prema rupa. Sa tvasmin parama prema rupa. Sa, this can be split as sa, tu, asmin, parama prema rupa. When the tvasmin gets split, it gets tu and asmin. Sa, tu, parama prema rupa. So what is the direct meaning of this sutra? Parama prema rupa means that is verily the nature of supreme love. Prema means love. That prema is a Sanskrit term for love. Rupa is form. Parama prema means supreme love. This bhakti is in the form of supreme love. So that is the simple meaning of that sutra. Sa tu asmin parama prema rupa means that devotion, because he had just said bhakti, so the tu asmin means what I have told about. I am going to talk about bhakti, so we have to assume that bhakti is actually a form of supreme love. And then he uses the word asmin here. He doesn't put any particular god. He doesn't say Vishnu, Shiva or Parvati Devi or Ganesha. He doesn't tell anything. So which means he is given the liberation, or is very liberal. Whichever god or whichever form you are considering important, asmin means whatever you consider your Ishta Devam or whatever it is, having supreme love for that is called bhakti. So that is what Narada is very liberal here, because as we know, Narada was not sectarian. Though he is a Vishnu Bhakta, he used to go and visit Shiva in Kailasha, he used to go to meet Brahmaji in Satyaloka, he used to go to everywhere. So we know that he is already... So this is again, Narada is defining, it is a form of supreme love. So what is this? So basically, this is again, when you read the commentaries, they differentiate. When you tell this is a form of supreme love, it has to fulfill certain qualities. There is no selfishness here, which means you are not doing transactional. I want this, that's why I am doing devotion. So that is called selfish love. That's also okay in early stages. But the supreme love or parabhakti it is selfless, no return expected. There is no fear. Sometimes you are afraid of some people, that's why you are acting as if you are liking them. Some we call because of lack of fear factor. So here there is no fear factor involved. It's like spontaneous with no pressure on you. And you are devoted to that God, without having your mind scattered to all worldly things. And it is also not blind faith or fanaticism. Sometimes we see on the name of religion, people kill. We have heard the crusade, the jihads, we know all those. It has happened even in Hindu religion. People have even done killings based on religion. So it is not blind faith or fanaticism. So these are all the qualities. When you call supreme love, it should be self. It should not have any selfish transaction. It should not be due to fear. It should not be mingled with other likingness. Oh, I like God, but I also like to go to the casino. So that is what, you don't need to have, all those things, other things which will be exclusive devotion to the God. And it is also not to the extreme of going blind faith and fanaticism. So this is all the different, so that's why I said each is a small sutra, but it is viewed from multiple viewpoints. So when you fulfill all these things, that's when it is called supreme love. So it is basically spontaneous, continuous, with no expectations. And if you look at this definition of bhakti, this is Narada's definition, and even Narada himself will give several definitions of bhakti as we go down. Adi Shankara has given his definition in Shivananda Laghari and Viveka Chudamani. Ramanujacharya, like I said, has given his definition in his Sri Bhashya and Vedartha Sangraha. And then other scholars like Madhusudana Saraswati, Narada himself defines bhakti in Narada Pancharath Ragama. So we know that Narada did not only Bhakti Sutras, he did a few other works too. One is called Narada Smriti, where he gives the rules and regulations that to be followed. Narada Pancharath Ragama, for example, our SV temple follows Pancharath Ragama, which is a particular protocol of worshipping the Lord, and there are different divisions even within the Pancharath Ragama. Narada Pancharath Ragama is one of them. Narada himself has detailed the exact procedure of how to worship the Lord in the temples and everything. It's called Narada Pancharath Ragama. And then Narada has written a book on music. That's very important. That's how he is one of the famous music scholars also. He is the one who propagated music also. So he has written Sangeeta Makaranda, which is a book on music. And only based on that, people have slowly developed all the musical concepts. Purandaradasa, Annamacharya, who came in our last 1,000 years, they all, indirectly their guru was Narada only. Even for Tyagaraja, it is said Narada actually appeared. Our Tyagaraja, Saint Tyagaraja, who lived in Tiruvarur and sang a lot of music. It is said that Narada Maharishi inspired Tyagaraja to write slokas on Rama or the kirtanas on Ramas. So even for the current singers, Narada was a big motivator. So he has written Sangeeta Makaranda, Narada Smriti, Narada Pancharath Ragama, Narada Bhakti Sutra. There is also a Naradiya Purana. So all these are there. So even Narada has given other definitions in Pancharath Ragama. That's what I want to tell. So next we will go to the Sutra number 3. Amurda Swarupacha. So the third Sutra is Amurda Swarupacha, which means Amurta Swarupa. So this is again a form of, Swarupa means again form of Amurta. So Amurta is a term which we use in Sanskrit. We have also seen some of our friends have names of Amrita and things like that. Amrita has two meanings in Sanskrit. One is nectar. It's very sweet nectar. It's like anything which is very tasteful. Even in Tamil we call Amridam Bola irukku, we tell in Tamil. When something tastes very much, it means Amridam Bola irukku, we tell. So Amrita actually indicates something which is very, very tasteful, very sweet, very nice to eat or drink. Amrita also means Mrityu. Mrityu means death. Amrityu means no death, which is immortal. You live forever. So Amrita has two meanings. One, it immortalizes. Immortality is one definition. Very tasteful is another definition. So actually Narada is using both the definitions here. So the word, when you have Parabhakti, again in the first 24 sutras, Narada is going to define only Parabhakti, because as you go to the Bhakti sadhanas and the qualities of devotee, he will define the two. I said I already told you two Bhaktis, Aparabhakti and Parabhakti. These are all the Parabhakti forms which Narada is explaining here. So this Amrita Bhakti, this Amrita Swarupacha, basically is defined as in the Parabhakti stage, you are enjoying nectar all the time. It is sweet and nectarine, and it also confers immortality to you. So basically one who is having this Parabhakti gets both. He is always enjoying the nectar, and at the same time he also becomes immortal. So the Parabhakti actually confers you immortality and permanent bliss. So because the final state of this is because Parabhakti confers you moksha, and that's how it gives you the state of bliss, because moksha is defined by all our acharyas as its eternal bliss. They call Nitya Sukha, Parama Shanti. These are, even Krishna uses these terms in Bhagavad Gita. So it's Nitya Sukha, Parama Shanti, Parama Tripti. So basically when people are in moksha, they are feeling completely satisfied. They are completely peaceful. They are full of bliss. So that's why everybody wants to get moksha, because moksha has all these qualities. So Parabhakti will give you that sweet nectarine bliss and also will confer you immortality. So that's why it's called Amrita Swarupacha. And this is very, very good example when Swami Ramakrishna Paramahamsa and Vivekananda were having a discussion on bhakti. And Ramakrishna Paramahamsa is very, very famous for giving these nice examples for people to understand. So when he is trying to teach Swami Vivekananda about bhakti, he is giving an example. He is telling, assume there is a fruit juice. So you are having a cup of, let's say, orange juice or apple juice. You have a full cup of the juice in front of you. And so he is telling to Vivekananda, okay, you are having a very sweet juice in a full cup, and let's assume I make you like a housefly. So Ramakrishna is telling Vivekananda, I will convert you into like a small fly or a small insect, and you want to taste the juice. How will you go and taste the juice, he says. Vivekananda is telling, I will sit on the edge of the cup, I will put my tongue inside the juice and I will start licking the juice slowly. Then Ramakrishna is telling, why do you want to sit on the side of the thing and drink it? Oh, because if I am a small fly, if I go inside the juice, I will get drowned in the juice, I will die inside the juice, I will be drowned. So that's when Ramakrishna is telling, that is the difference between a fly drinking a juice and a human drinking the juice of bhakti. Because if you go deep into bhakti, you drown in bhakti, you actually become immortal. So the immortality example is given like that. If you are juice and you are a small fly drinking the juice from the side, you will sink in the juice and you will die. But whereas if you are a bhakta, you want to drink the juice of bhakti, you go deep into the bhakti, you actually get more and more immortality. So that is how Ramakrishna explains this Amrita Swarupacha. So we are running short of time, and what I will do is I will cover another 2-3 sutras. We'll just go about 5-10 minutes extra. We are like close to 11 o'clock now, and I will try to finish by 11:10. So that I'll cover another 2-3 sutras, and then we'll go for the next session after that. So the sutra number 4 is Yel labdva puman siddho bhavati amrto bhavati tripto bhavati. So that is the 4th sutra. Yel labdva puman siddho bhavati amrto bhavati tripto bhavati. So here it is turned, Yel labdva means one who has acquired this parabhakti. Puman means man, but here it is generally mean human. So Narada is not Shaktiran again. Though use the term Puman here, all the acharyas have commented the term Puman should mean to be understood as human. Any human being who has acquired this parabhakti, siddho bhavati, amurto bhavati, tripto bhavati. He gets all these three. Siddho bhavati means siddha, he becomes fully accomplished. Amurto bhavati means he becomes immortal. Tripto bhavati means he is fully satisfied. Because all of us are not satisfied with life. All of us have some, inadequacies. We feel we didn't achieve that, we didn't do this, we didn't do that. But when you get this parabhakti, you will feel fully accomplished. You will feel nectarine bliss and immortality, and you will also feel fully satisfied. Tripto means satisfied. So you acquire all these three things. So again the term Puman. So this is where the acharyas are telling the word, the way Narada puts it as human, he didn't put Brahmana or Kshatriya or Vaishya, Shudra, he says every human. So the term is a very general term. All the humans can follow the path of bhakti and they can get all these three done. So it is like non-sectarian, non-exclusive, it's not exclusive, it's inclusive of all. So because Narada didn't put like in the Sattva, he didn't put any particular god, same way he put anybody, any human who can get this parabhakti can get all these three. So he doesn't specify only rishis can get it or only acharyas can get it. So he's again using a broad term that all of these can be getting it. And again they are telling me, okay, the question is coming, okay, you are telling parabhakti but you are giving me three things, siddho, amrito and tripto bhavati. How can I get three things at one time? And this is a very nice sloka from the Bhagavatam which is quoted by our acharyas. They give the example of milk. Milk or badam milk. Let's say you have badam milk in your home. It's very tasty. You are coming home very hungry. You are very tired. So you have a cup of good badam milk in front of you. You drink the milk. Immediately you get three things. One, your hunger gets satisfied. Two, your taste gets satisfied. Three, you also get energy. You are very tired. As soon as you drink 1 or 2 cups of badam milk, your body feels very energized. So you are getting three. You are drinking only 1 cup of milk, but you are getting three things at the same time. Your hunger is satisfied. Your taste is satisfied. You are also getting energy. Same way only, this example given in Bhagavatam itself. So that is why people are worshipping the feet of the Lord. They will get all all these things. And Bhagavatam also says they will get bhakti, jnana. There are 2 slokas explaining this. One telling bhakti will grow, jnana will grow, vairagya will grow as you worship the God. And one thing is you will become siddho bhavati, amurto bhavati, tripto bhavati. You will get all these three when you are worshipping the Lord. So you can get bhakti, jnana, vairagya, amrita, siddho and tripto bhavati. Like how if you drink sweet milk, you can get all at one time. Same way by getting this parabhakti, you get all at one time. So we will do 1 or 2 more sutras and we will finish up this session. Can we go to the next one? Sutra number 5. Yat prapya na kinchit vanchati na shoshati na dveshti na ramate na utsahi bhavati. So Sutra number 5 again. Yat prapya na kinchit vanchati na shoshati na dveshti na ramate na utsahi bhavati. So again, it's the previous sloka said yat labdva. This sloka is telling yat prapya. So there's a difference between labdva and prapya. Labdva means you gain. Prapya means you attained. So what is the difference between gained and attained? Attained means most of the time you have to do the work. Gain means you say loss or gain. I gained something, which means you can get it even without sometimes working. We call adrishta. You know, you didn't work hard, but somebody gave you a lot of money by ancestral property or something like that. You gained those things. Whereas when you work for something and you get it by your work, you call attained. So that is how Sanskrit defines gained and attained. Attained means always through your work you get it. And gained means you can get it by your work, but you can also get it without work, like a grace of somebody you can get it too. So basically a devotee also attains these things when he's having parabhakti. Yat prapya. Once you get this parabhakti means yat prapya means when you attain to this parabhakti, na kinchit vanchati, na shoshati, na dveshti, na ramate, na utsahi bhavati. It gives you all these things you can have. Basically it says na vanchati means you are not wanting. Na means negative. Vanchati means I want something. Na vanchati means he is not wanting anything. Na shoshati means shoka. He is not depressed. He is not sorrowful. Na dveshti. Dvesha means hatred. He has no hatred. Na ramate. Ramate means always enjoying something. He doesn't want any enjoyment. Now utsahi bhavati means excitement. You want to do some. I want to do this. I want to do. So enjoying something is one. I'm excited about doing this. I'm excited about this travel. I'm excited about meeting this person we tell. He is not excited about the other things. So one who has got this parabhakti, he has no wants, he has no sorrow, he has no hatred, he is not wanting any enjoyment. He is not excited about anything else. So when you get this parabhakti, it gives you all by itself. So that's why you don't want anything else. So that is why it is these people are people in parabhakti, they are fully satisfied, and when they have this, they are in full God consciousness, and they have everything they want there. So they are not running about other things. But the question asks is, okay, if the devotee doesn't want anything, what is he going to do in the rest of the life? He is living here. So that's when Prahlada says, it is a very important sloka by Prahlada in Narasimha Avatara in the Bhagavatam. He says to Lord Vishnu, by your grace I have got everything. I am fully satisfied. I have nothing to accomplish. It's all by your grace. I have gotten everything what I need. I am very satisfied. But I feel all the other people on the earth are suffering. So I want you to help me so that I can help all those people. So I know I am fully satisfied, but I want to spend my life satisfying and uplifting other people. So that's what Prahlada says in Bhagavatam. So that's why even in the Bhaktas, even if they are fully satisfied, they are always working and doing things not for themselves. They are always there for uplifting. And this is Prahlada was the prime example. He says to Lord, I am fully satisfied, but I am very, very sorry to see all these people suffering on the samsara. So I want to help them, and I want you to take care of them also. And Prahlada spent his rest of the life trying to uplift people through bhakti and other things like that. So these people don't want anything for themselves, but they are always thinking about the welfare of other people also. So with that, I am going to end this session with the 5th sutra of the Narada Bhakti Sutras, and we will continue them in our next session. Shriya Kantaya Kalyana Nade Ertinam Shri Venkata Nivasaya Srinivasaya Mangalam Mangalam Koshalendraya Mahaniya Gunapte Chakravarti Tanujaya Sarvabhaumaya Mangalam Hari Om.